Coming up on Big Ten Today, the league's top dogs stay in front of the pack. Post-game thoughts from Howard Griffith on weekend wins by Oregon, Ohio State, and Penn State. Meantime, the Illini reach lucky number 7. 2 more teams are set to go bowling, and USC keeps its postseason hope alive. A complete Week 12 recap on the way. Plus, around the Big Ten checks on Fort Storm's Ohio State's conference title in men's soccer and a Final Four trip for NU field hockey. This is Big Ten Today. With that, welcome to inside this edition of Big Ten Today, presented by Gatorade. Rick Pizzo, Howard Griffith alongside. Hard to believe we have just 2 weekends left in the regular season. The best of the Big Ten remain up there. Oregon still unbeaten. Indiana, of course, had the weekend off. There's still a lot to figure out as we try to clear up the playoff picture, but the Big Ten certainly seems to be coming into focus.
It absolutely does, and you talk about the big game that's going to happen. Ohio State, Indiana is going to tell us a whole lot about what's going to happen as far as the championship game, starting to move toward that. So there's some other teams that are still trying to get bowl eligible. There's some teams that are trying to get to a better bowl. So this is going to be a really important week for a lot of programs.
And I think it's a surprise that some of those teams that are not quite bowl eligible yet have a couple of games left, and they don't exactly have easy matchups. We'll get into what awaits teams like USC and Nebraska, squads that we thought at the beginning of the year were ready to take a huge step forward, instead have taken a bit of a step backward in late October and throughout the course of November. It is time for our big story, and we start at the top, where Oregon battled a Badger team that did not go quietly into that Madison night. Ducks found a way to win by 3 and now have a week off before the regular season finale against Washington. Ohio State off to something of a slow start in the friendly confines before blowing away Northwestern. Buck scored 31 unanswered to close. Up next, that Week 13 Saturday showdown Howard mentioned with unbeaten Indiana. And Penn State did exactly what was expected against Purdue, throttling the Boilermakers 49-10 in yet another showcase performance for the tight end / Swiss Army knife known as Tyler Warren. So you take a look at all the CFP teams inside the top 12 and how they fared this past weekend. BYU loses to Kansas. That potentially opens the door for Colorado inside the Big 12. We'll see how the College Football Playoff Committee handles that. Tennessee was one of those teams hanging around. They lose to Georgia, so expect a big bump for the Bulldogs this week. There should not be any change inside the top 5 with the 4 teams that played winning by double digits, with the exception of Oregon, who won on the road, and Indiana being idle. So let's start with the Ducks in Madison. There were some moments and some questionable calls, perhaps, by Dan Lanning late in that game. I'm not sure what that fake field goal was all about, but he said afterwards, I can rely on my defense. And to me, that speaks volumes, because all the talk outside this program is about Dillon Gabriel and Jordan James and this explosive offense. Howard, defensively, this team is as good as any that we've seen.
As well it should be. You know, there should be a lot of talk about offense, but the reality is, I think for you to be able to go on and win championships, you have to be able to get a defense that can go anywhere at any time and really be able to shut the door on their opposing offenses. And that's what we've been able to see this defense do. And there were some opportunities in this game that they actually missed. There were some dropped interceptions that were there, so they could have really extended this lead. But I think it's also important to see Oregon play in a game like this in a hostile environment, which is Madison, at night game, and they really still rose to the occasion, particularly on the defensive side of the football, to get things done.
It's a road win inside the Big Ten. Listen, it was about a decade or so ago. I was in Madison when Ohio State was number 1, showed up for a night game, and Wisconsin knocked them off. So I don't think the committee will look at this in any way and say that Oregon should be punished for winning by 3, especially when the team right behind them, Ohio State, does have a loss. I did find it interesting that Terrence Ferguson wasn't looking at Dillon Gabriel on a late attempt to score the touchdown that would have put this game away. And I think there are still questions, Howard, until Tez Johnson returns on the outside. Does Dillon Gabriel have a go-to guy? Because if you want to win it all, you usually have to have that thoughtless connection, the one you don't have to worry about between a quarterback and a wide receiver.
I think one of the things that we see, particularly when we watch Oregon from an offensive standpoint, their passing game, there are a lot of teams that try to line up and play man-to-man against them. So you get a lot of crossing routes that come open underneath. One of the things that the Badgers did, and I thought did an unbelievable job, they played a lot of zone, and they were able to get pressure with 4 blitzers and 4 defensive linemen coming after. And what I saw was wide receivers at certain points running through zones when they should have been sitting. So one of the interceptions, the tip ball behind them, I thought the receiver should have sat because it was clearly zone. He should have sat out, and that's where he would have caught it. So I think there's some small things that they have to continue to get better at as far as the receiving group that needs to make sure that they can make the right reads, because those could, in a bigger game, playing against a more explosive offense, could have got him in trouble.
That's why I think in the fourth quarter, especially that drive that led to an Atticus Sappington field goal, the game-winning field goal eventually, it was Jordan James and Jordan James and Jordan James. They were letting him go between the tackles, trying to run out that clock a little bit. And also because I don't think there was a lot of faith in what Wisconsin's offense could do against that Duck defense. And we found out over the course of the weekend that Luke Fickell believes it's time for a change. Phil Longo, the offensive coordinator, has been relieved of his duties effective immediately. He was one of the splash hires when Luke Fickell got the job before the start of the 2023 season, and he came in with a terrific resume, had done great things with that air raid offense at North Carolina and other places. Howard, it seemed like for a couple of games and a stretch of about 3 weeks in the middle of this season, they had figured it out, but then it reverted, and this was a move, obviously, that Fickell felt like he had to make, and he had to make midseason.
I'll take you back to the summer, and let me be very clear about this when I say this. Part of what we do when we get a chance to go out and speak with coaches and watch practice is also kind of read the tea leaves, kind of look at the nonverbals. And I'm not in any way saying, because Luke didn't tell me at all that he thought, he was going to have to make a change after this year if things didn't go right. But it was clear that he wanted to see certain things. He wanted to continue to see this offense be more creative and be able to get things going. And it was just the nonverbals there that something wasn't necessarily right. But it was a tough decision, and you have to continue to allow your team to continue to grow, and I thought they tried to do that. Now, you make a move like this right now, to me, that also talks about where you want to go moving forward, and also probably does it have something to do as well with the recruiting. That is right
early
around
signing
the
day is December 4th?
Yeah, it's right around the corner, so there are a lot of things that are in play when you make a decision like that. But one thing I know, that Luke Fickell knows exactly what he's doing, and he knows what he wants, and it's hard to make decisions like this in your second year, but particularly when you're doing it in the season.
Yeah, give the Badgers a lot of credit for hanging with Oregon for all of 60 minutes. And speaking of the Ducks, before we leave this game, let's check in with Yogi Roth, who joins us for the first time with his thoughts on Oregon. Closer than expected, Yogi, but any win in this league on the road is typically considered a good win.
Yeah, and I think especially when you don't have the history of playing in these venues, I think that can't be lost on these new teams coming to this league. And you saw it in the third quarter. I mean, all of us, I think, wherever you were watching the game, you're wondering, all right, what's Oregon going to do here on a fourth down? Like, the crowd is going to be at its loudest. It was a complete frenzy. And as the camera panned, you saw Dan Lanning smirk. You saw Dylan Gabriel steely-eyed. And then when the game began in the fourth quarter, they went for it. And they delivered, and they converted a fourth down, and away they go on that drive. So I think, to me, that says a lot. It reminded me, watching it in real time, from way back in the day. When I coached at USC, Pete Carroll would always be going for it on fourth down, so much so that the student section created a chant around him. You can go find that on the internet somewhere. But it was basically about him having the guts to go for it. To me, when you do things like that, it's not about bravado in the moment. It's not about the noise and you trying to rise up against it. It's about really having a connection to know what your team is about in the most strenuous of times, in the most stressful of situations. And Dan Lanning and that team, I don't think there was a doubt on that sideline that they were going to go for it on fourth down, even though the crowd was at it as what it was. And I love that for this team. That, to me, is not him rolling the dice. That, to me, is him understanding what this team is capable of and reflecting the ideals that you hear in their documentaries you watch online during the week, or if you go there, like Howard just referenced, when you go there for training camp, you go there for practice, you see that reflected in the players. And I think that's going to bode extremely well, because those moments are only going to be cranked up as the season continues. Championship game, playoff. They got their rivalry game after a bye week. So that to me was the biggest takeaway. I absolutely loved that he went for it. And I didn't mind the call. I mean, they were this close to breaking it. I didn't mind it one drop because of the way that he knows his team. I know people on the internet maybe didn't agree with that. But overall, I think this team is finding ways to continue to control their psyche and then eventually control, ideally, their path to not only a championship game, but potentially more.
Now, I'm with you. I'm okay with the call and going for it there because you trust your defense. I know they were super close. I'm just the kind of guy, if I'm going to go for it on fourth down, I want Dylan Gabriel to have the ball in his hands, maybe Jordan James to have the ball in his hands. Understand your point. At the end of the day, the Ducks get it done in Madison. They are unbeaten. They have the weekend off and finish up at home. They'll be inside Autzen for that game against Washington at the end of the year. Ohio State played in a fascinating venue on Saturday inside the friendly confines as the Buckeyes knock off Northwestern at Wrigley Field 31-7. Ohio State gave up the first touchdown and then scored 31 unanswered. One loss still on the season for Ohio State as they head back home to Columbus for this weekend's much-anticipated showdown with unbeaten Indiana. Yogi, I think Ohio State is a fascinating case for the College Football Playoff Committee for all of us college football fans because you can make an argument they're as talented as anybody in the country. They have the best loss in the country if you want to quantify good and bad losses, 1 point on the road to Oregon. And I think you could even say they have yet to play a full 60 minutes of football, which could be scary for their opposition the rest of the way.
Well, look, I think because here we go. We're in the debate mode, right, of two leagues comparing one another. To me, when I look at the top of the Big Ten right now, the thing that has stood out to me in my first year, like really embedded in this league, as you guys know, is teams just lean on you and lean on you and lean on you. Before you know it, whether it's Ohio State, Oregon, Penn State, like a game is over. You do not see Ohio State, these highs and lows like I think you see in teams in the SEC right now. And I think that's a fair statement to make because consistency is, I think, what's going to allow teams to find success. Look at Ohio State in this game. They got the absolute best from Northwestern. Love the game plan. Ohio State had the ball they ran 10 plays in the first quarter. Only had the ball for 5 minutes. Double that in the second quarter, and away they go. So they got the best from Northwestern, and what do? They just stayed steady, man. And I look at whether it was Chip Kelly and the style of play they want to do with their spacing, run game, whether, of course, it's the explosive receivers. We know what the defense did with where they have almost 10 TFLs in this ballgame, and they were just dominant at the line of scrimmage second quarter through the end of the game. But overall, this to me is a team just like Purdue a week ago. First quarter, I think it was 7-0 after one. This game, same deal. Maybe it was 0-0 in the Purdue game 2 weeks ago. But point being, they're always going to get the best. And what do you have to do when you do that? You don't have to freak out. You don't have to try new plays. You just have to stay steady. And I think that's, to me, what Ohio State has been in the majority of this season.
Yeah, I don't get concerned about them, what Northwestern was able to do early in the game, particularly on the first drive, because there's so often you have your first 15 or your first 12, whatever the offense may have. So it's scripted. You understand what you're expecting to see, so you can kind of put yourself in a situation where not only the players but the coordinators kind of have a feel for what they're expecting to see from their opposing defense. But the fact that Ohio State, at the moment they need to take control of a game, can get that done, I think the offensive line is playing much better than we probably give them credit for. There's a lot of talk. What's happening on this side? We're having to move players all around. But this is a talented group of guys, and it's just about them being able to get to that point. Defensively, you see how much talent is over there. With Caleb Downs and playing him closer to the line of scrimmage really creates a lot of problems for defenses. He does a tremendous job, not only in coverage, but versus the run. This is a really talented team. We know that. It's about just them continuing to stay steady.
Yeah, and just to clarify, there was no score in that game after one. Jack Lausch, though, did give Northwestern the first lead of the game about 2.5 minutes into the second quarter. Cats went up 7-0. Ohio State then scored the last 31. I'll just say this in closing on Ohio State, Howard. I understand that you can start slow against Purdue. Mm-hmm. You can start a little slower than you want against Northwestern. You start slow against a team like Indiana that is coming off a bye, and it could be trouble. I mean, the last time Indiana came off a bye and had 2 weeks to prep, there was a lot of talk about how tough Nebraska was going to be with that Tony White defense, and they just blew them away from the jump.
Well, I think the biggest part of it is there's one side that can start slow, right? It's offense, defense, or, special teams has got to be outstanding. But if your offense is struggling a little bit, they got to rely upon the defense and vice versa. So I think with these really good, talented teams, That's what they have to be able to do. They can't find themselves in a situation where they're not getting it done and playing at a high level on both sides of the ball. That's a problem.
One final thought on this topic as we check in again with Yogi Roth. Yogi?
So, you know the phrase Ohio State has said all year, which is basically leave no doubt. The thing I'll be watching so closely when they play, as you just referenced, Indiana this weekend, is the best teams to me, sometimes they get to this point where they just want what I call an exhale win, which is like, whew, got through that, got through Purdue, got through Northwestern, got through Indiana, whatever. The teams that are really elite, they're the ones that when they walk out on the field, they're not just trying to get through it. They're not feeling that pressure. They flip it. They look at that and say, oh my God, I am switched on. I can't wait for this opportunity to showcase what I believe my truth to be. And that's what I can't wait to watch, because we know the expectations. We know whether it's NIL, preseason hype, loss against Oregon. It is all there for Ohio State. You guys know that pressure more than even I do, but it is palpable. You can feel that. So I can't wait to watch the psyche of Ohio State in this game, because Indiana's going to move the ball. But let's just be straight up about it. They're going to move the ball. They're going to have success. They're going to find ways, I think, to penetrate in the backfield. To me, it's going to be, how do they navigate that? What is Ryan Day front-loading on a Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday? All embedded in every phase of his team, because that, to me, is what I want to see. When it's tight, do they relax? Do they have a smile on their face of like, look at this opportunity, man, let's ride? Or is it, oh, damn, here we go, a lot of expectations? That, to me, is something that we won't know until we see on Saturday, until we hear from players and coaches after that. But that is the number one key to me, especially in this new playoff era. The best teams need to be switched on and attack the opportunity versus, can we meet the moment again? How are we navigating a peak moment again? And that, to me, I think it's a worthy discussion among the top teams in the country, especially the ones that have pressure like Ohio State does coming into the season, coming into this latter part of November.
You want one last sign about just how big and impactful this Ohio State-Indiana game is? We're less than 2 weeks away from Ohio State-Michigan. Haven't even thought about it because of what's on tap this weekend.
Says a lot.
Buckeyes and Wolverines think about it, I know, 365 days a year. We are more worried about the Buckeyes and Hoosiers this weekend. Still to come, Tyler Warren does it again. What are we to make of the Heisman chances for this tight end turned ultimate utility player? Plus, Illinois, a very quiet 7-3, back inside the AP top 25. How the Illini got back on track when Big Ten Today returns. We are back on Big Ten Today with a big stat. Tyler Warren has tied Pat Freiermuth for the most receiving touchdowns by a tight end in Penn State history. Check out some of the names on this list. NFL, all these guys either played in or are still currently playing in the NFL, and you could make an argument that Warren has done more for Penn State than any of those previous guys have done because of what he does in so many different ways. Rick Pizzo, Howard Griffith, Yogi Roth, back with you. Yogi, we'll get to Penn State as a team in a second, but all three of us are Heisman voters. And I was thinking about this over the course of the weekend. I know that Dylan Gabriel, Ashton Genty, and Travis Hunter are basically everybody's top three right now. I don't think you can ignore Tyler Warren because of what he has done and how many different fashions he's done it so far this year for the Nittany Lions.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I got a 10-point scale. I don't know how you guys evaluate the Heisman, but three of them are the following. I want to share them with you. One is, would I pay to go see him play? And the answer to that is yes, 100%. Wherever it is, I'm buying a ticket because it's so creative in the way he gets utilized. You see it right there. Two is, how does he navigate really big stages? And to me, you just watch every single game. He just continues to elevate in a variety of different ways. Even when they don't have the ball a ton, you saw him make that big play against Ohio State at home. That was a huge one. And then the third one is, how does he impact everybody around him? And he just makes the whole thing better. I mean, imagine being Andy Kolnicki right now, right? You're in your office late at night. You're trying to draw some plays up, and you're like, what do I want to do with this guy this week? Quarterback, some running back. What should we put him in motion? Little left tackle. Like, well, what do we want to do with him? I cannot wait to watch the next thing. And then he just delivers. He's so productive. We saw it in the Purdue game. I cannot imagine that staff went into that game saying, let's just ignore wherever Tyler Warren is. And how open was he so many times? I mean, I love how they do it. The scheme around him is really impressive. And I do think that he has warranted legitimate Heisman discussion. He's definitely in my top 4 or 5 players right now where we sit in mid-November.
Yeah, I think when you look at the way he impacts games, it's really, truly impressive, whether he's asked to be an inline blocker, whether it's playing quarterback, whether it's adjusting to a back shoulder throw. He just gets it done. And what we've seen is he's really been the catalyst for this offense really exploding. To me, we can talk about how the run game and the offensive line and what they haven't been able to have necessarily on a consistent basis at the wide receiver positions, but when they find ways to get him the ball, this offense really opens up.
Nobody in the bold prediction area had Tyler Warren as both Penn State's leading receiver and leading rusher last week. If they had, it would have been a check, and it would have been awfully impressive. Yogi, as for Penn State as a whole, they have the one loss to Ohio State. They've taken care of business against everybody else. They have a tough test this week, and I think this is a tricky game on the road against Minnesota before they finish up at home against Maryland. I'm not sure they survive a second loss, but if they take care of business against Minnesota, I think they have a little bit of cushion when it comes to their college football playoff future.
Well, I'll say this. 2 weeks ago, I got this like a composite schedule here, and I'm looking at it, and I'm saying, okay, I see upset city here in Minnesota going against Penn State in 2 weeks, right? This was a couple weeks ago. I know what Minnesota can do at home. I've called some games there this season. I love what their offense and Greg Harbaugh has done. I think they play situations really well. But then you go watch not only Rutgers against Minnesota, but then you watch Penn State against Washington. You watch Penn State this past weekend. And I think James Franklin nailed it after the game. He said it was their best 4 quarters. And I would agree with that. I mean, regardless of opponent, you did not see many missed gaps. You did not see many missed tackles. You did not see many missed assignments. I mean, it was a pretty flawless game outside of course, one drop that they'd love to have back for a touchdown later in the game. But overall, when the ones were in, this was absolutely dominant the last 8 quarters that Penn State has played. And now I just see them peaking. I mean, they were one of those teams throughout the season. West Virginia, okay, they're dominant. Bowling Green, what's going on here? And up and down as the year went on to a certain degree. I find them on their way to playing their best football of the season. And I think they'll look at this game, just like your reference, man, of this is a playoff game. And I think that this new playoff era has allowed that to happen in a grander way of these quote-unquote play-in games, whether that's this game, whether that's Texas A&M. Like, it's kind of fun in that regard, big picture in college football. So I imagine both teams will be prepared, but I think the defense and the ability of Abdul Carter and company in this front and what they continue to do against teams, I think that will show up on the road. The Tyler Warren factor is real. I think they'll continue to run the football. And I think Drew Aller's not getting enough love. I mean, he's playing at a dramatically efficient level. He's not just managing, he's managing with mastery. So I'm a fan of where Penn State sits heading into this game, much more than I was 2 weeks ago.
One of the things that comes to mind for me when you talk about this Penn State team is for me, I talked about the psyche of this team. We know how talented they are, but would they play down to their opponent? That was my concern. That's what I wanted them not to do. And they didn't do it. And you talk about going out and Yogi, you mentioned earlier when we were talking about Oregon being able to flip the switch. You saw Penn State flip the switch. It did not matter who they were competing against. It was all about what they were doing. And for me, I need to continue to see that as we ratchet things up, as things get more. Because if we talk about this Minnesota team, this is absolutely a dangerous football team. But still, when you look at the rosters, Penn State is still there. So can they continue to elevate? That'll be the challenge.
And the reason I think they have to is not because it would be a bad loss, but because, and again, you play who's on your schedule. If they were to lose that Minnesota game and have 2 losses at the end of the year, then the College Football Playoff Committee is looking at each other saying, well, what's Penn State's best win? Because the USC win doesn't look quite as good anymore. The Illinois win right now is probably Penn State's best win now that the Illini are 7-3. And that leads us into Illinois' weekend win. It was a close game into the third quarter, actually separated by just 5 points before Illinois scores the final 17 to win it 38-16. The 38 points most any Illini team has scored against the Spartans since dropping 40 years ago. A lot of synergy right there. And I feel like Illinois, Yogi, is a very quiet 7-3. They're back inside the top 25. I know with 3 losses, they're not going to be part of this college football playoff conversation. But based on what they have left and the possibility to get to 9 in the regular season, this would have to be considered a successful year for Brett Bielema and company.
It's been a phenomenal journey to watch this team. I watched this stadium just continue to fill and fill and fill. And Howard, you know it better than anybody. By the way, happy birthday, man. I know you had a big one. I hope you did. And it's always better when Illinois plays well, right? And I go to them on defense. Aaron Henry, their defensive coordinator, to me was so impressive because you're going up against a scheme in Michigan State that always has answers, right? And what are they, 2 of 15, I think, on third down in this ball game against this Illinois defense? Jonathan Smith just does not do that. You very rarely see that. But whether it was rush lanes, blitz, different types of pressures, coverage in the back end, just winning your man-to-man at the line of scrimmage from the defensive end position. I mean, they did it kind of every which way when you go back and you study this ball game. So overall, just a complete team win. And I think we're looking at an Illinois team that I would imagine they'll sneak up on people in recruiting, right? They're a different game than maybe some of the perennial blue bloods in terms of the NIL caliber of attraction. They're going to find, I bet, a bunch of really gifted players, 3-4-star players going to come in and just continue to propel this thing forward. I mean, they will be, I know the season's not over yet. They will be the darlings next season coming into the 2025 season, and rightfully so. I love what they said after the game, the tough, smart, dependable edge. You see that has showed up. Go back and watch that Penn State game that you referenced again. I mean, they're right there in that ball game. So congratulations to them. I know it's not over, but what they have built there from where it was, to me, is really impressive to watch.
Yeah, 9 of 16 on third down and fourth down combined. That's pretty good. And you look at Pat Bryant and what he's been able to add to this offense. He just goes and gets it and makes plays happen. And you mentioned Aaron Henry. And I think what we've been watching really for the last 2 years is just his ascension, him being comfortable as a defensive coordinator. Last year was tough. It was a struggle. But you've seen them make jumps this year, and part of it had to do with some of the injuries, but you also saw the players really start to develop. And when Yogi talks about getting those 3- and 4-star players there, this is a developmental program. So it is paramount that you have coaches in place that can develop those young people. They're not necessarily coming in ready to go out and compete day one, like some of the other programs are that are out there. But if they can stay in the system, understand and learn the game, then you end up with a team like you have now that's able to pay attention to details, that's not hurting themselves. They just need to keep that formula moving forward.
That's why you're 7-3 with 2 of those 3 losses coming against the current number 1 and number 4 teams in the CFP rankings. And happy belated birthday. See, that's what I miss for not being a social media guy. If I was all over, I would have known. Thanks to Yogi Roth for catching that, and belated happy birthday to Howard Griffith. Coming off 4 losses in its last 5 games, USC absolutely had to have this weekend's game against Nebraska, and the Trojans found a way. Sophomore QB Jaden Mayava was solid. Woody Marks was spectacular. And the USC defense came up with a huge game-ending INT to keep the Trojans' bowl hopes alive with just 2 games left to play. Of course, one of those games at the end of the year against Notre Dame, which will be a very tough ask. So probably need to find a way to win this weekend to get to that magical 6. Yogi, there was a lot of talk about Lincoln Riley's decision to bench Miller Moss and go with Jaden Mayava. He's been really good. He's looked calm. He's looked like the guy that we expected him to be. But we cannot take away from what Woody Marks has done, not just in this game, but this year. He's very quietly had an outstanding season running the ball for the Trojans.
Well, I think you go back and look at Lincoln Riley's career as a play caller, whether it's at East Carolina, Oklahoma, here at SC. When it's at its best, the offensive linemen are moving, pulling, right? We've all seen the counter scheme that they like to run, and the backs are having success finding edges. And they did that again on Saturday against Nebraska at the most critical times. Now, didn't necessarily think it'd be in the, running the option off the edge on a 4th down, but they found ways to continue to find Woody Marks the ball. I look at this team, and to me, I kind of referenced it earlier with Ohio State of like when the pressure is there, and it is there, 365 for SC, much like it is for all the blue bloods in college football. How do you navigate it? And I think this team, they start off with a pick 6 to kick off the party. Their new quarterback goes 2 of 7 with that interception. And then what do? 9 for their next 9 as a quarterback, 2 touchdowns, running the ball with consistency with Woody Marks, and then finish it on the ground game with the option you saw, then the quarterback keeper to put the game away there. So overall, big time performance. right? This is not the team that we thought both of these teams would be coming into the season at this point in November, but it was still a highly competitive atmosphere. I loved how every snap mattered, both teams desperate for a victory. And you got to give SC credit for the way that they were able to lean on this new quarterback. And to me, most importantly for him, to flush it. Like, if you saw the post-game interview, I thought it was one of the most vulnerable things we've seen all season from a player after a game, where he said, oftentimes I harbor plays. I'm paraphrasing here, but that's what most quarterbacks do. They throw a pick and it's really hard to get over it. And every time a quarterback coach or the play caller goes to them on the sideline, they're saying a version of, you have to flush it. You have to flush it and move on. Way easier to say it here on the Schmooze on a Monday than in real time in front of a sold-out Coliseum. And I thought that Jaden Mayava did that. And I loved how he addressed it after the game, and I think his performance reflected doing just that.
Really did a nice job. And I thought that the touchdown run that he had is one of the things that really becomes a difference for this offense. And his athleticism on that play really, really stood out. But when you think about what Woody Marks has meant to this offense, it's been outstanding. But for the quarterback to be able to be comfortable enough in the pocket, even when you have a mistake, to be able to go up, and his receivers made plays for him too. And that's a big part of it. And when you can have that type of confidence in your pass game, you know, that excels. And again, we talked about Woody Marks a little bit. His ability to not only run the football outside and inside, but catching the ball out of the backfield and coming up with huge plays that way also helps this offense move. And I think when you go back and you look at the games where they're having success, Woody Marks is having a great deal of success, run and pass.
USC has UCLA this weekend. Nebraska, meanwhile, returns home. They have Wisconsin, and then they finish up against Iowa. They have to find a win in there, Yogi, to become bowl eligible. This is not a conversation that we thought we would be having some 4 or 5 weeks ago after the Huskers started 5-1.
Well, we keep going back to the mental side of the game. I mean, it's just a reality. I mean, you can train 3 things according to psychology. You can train your mind, you can train your style of play or whatever it is that you love to do, whether it's quarterback playing the ball, and you can also train your body. To me, it's going to go back to the mind. And for Matt Rule, he is the CEO of this thing. He is the architect of this thing. And now this team, the theme all season was chasing 3. I mean, they built a doc series around the 3 points that they have missed in terms of gaining bowl eligibility. So how do you get your team amid change, right? We've talked about Dane Holgorsen over the last 2 weeks, the change on the offensive coordinator, and now these tight losses, because it's real easy to start making, to me, excuses, right? Was a PI, no PI at the end of the game. I mean, you can go down that road. Matt Rule, we know him well enough he's not allowing that locker room to do that. They have to not only just be like mission minded, but like rep by rep minded. They have to come out, and they do it, I think, every Tuesday. They have that compete period where it's best versus best, and it's just all about that type of competition. That has to be the theme for the week and really the last 2 games of this season if they want to get to the postseason. Because right now, to me, there can be some locker room lawyers, right? There can be some debate, at least in your own head, of, God, what works? Where are we at our best? And that, to me, is when an athlete is never going to maximize their potential. So the staff has to front load that. And we know Matt Rule well enough. He's already on it. He's been on it, I would imagine, for weeks in that regard, just navigating the pulse of his team, because that will be the biggest challenge, knowing that they still have to chase those 3 to see if they can find their way to the postseason second straight year.
I think the number is 0-9 trying to get bowl eligible, and that's obviously just not Matt Rule. But it's interesting. The interesting psychology about this is you talk about the close games. They've had issues with close games since they've joined the Big Ten
multiple
Conference.
coaching staff.
Yeah, and that's the point. So that you know, you have it with multiple coaching staff. You have it with multiple teams. What exactly is it? And you think about it, and you talk about Matt Rule really addressing this head on. It's addressing it, figuring it out, and let's go. Because these guys have to be able to execute when the time comes to be able to get over the hump. Because this is not at all the season that they thought it was going to be. And if you don't become bowl eligible, man, it's a tough situation to be in.
8 of those 9 losses that you mentioned under Matt Rule. That's why this weekend at home, to me, against Wisconsin becomes so vital. You lose a game, and then you have to play on the Friday after Thanksgiving in Iowa City in that rivalry, knowing you have to win just to get to a bowl game. That is a big-time ask. And so while both USC and Nebraska need 1 win to qualify for the postseason, Two other teams earned their bowl bids. We look back on Week 12 wins for both Washington and Rutgers when Big Ten Today returns. Wins of the season. Yogi, let's start with Washington because I felt like this was a huge win. UCLA was playing really good football. The Huskies were coming off a disappointing performance when they were blown out in front of that whiteout crowd in Penn State, and then they return home. They do enough to beat a really game Bruins team, and I don't think you can overstate the importance of Jedd Fisch in year one getting to a bowl game for recruiting, for those extra practices before the bowl. It is absolutely huge for the Huskies.
Yeah, let's just put some context around it, right? You're replacing over 40 players that went to the national championship game a year ago. You get hired as late as anybody in the country in terms of the hiring process. Majority of your team is in the portal when you show up. Majority of your offensive line is in the portal when you show up. And you got to just kind of go figure it out, and the standard's really high. What do? They navigated that. They went undefeated at home. They beat both LA schools. Look at the game you just referenced. They came off that game against Penn State. White out, late night. They get home in the wee hours of Sunday morning and have a short week. I mean, nobody's given them any, it wasn't an easy path is basically the easiest way to say that. And they didn't flinch. I think for Jedd Fisch, what a job. What a job to do that. And then to navigate the quarterback room, right? You have Will Rogers. He's your guy. He's thrown for more yards than anybody coming into the season in college football. And you've got this talented freshman in Damon Williams. And they just did a nice job of navigating that relationship. And I think we saw the baton be handed a little bit in the end of this game against UCLA. And Damon Williams and UW went and won the game. I mean, you got to give them all of that credit. A makeshift offensive line. They got an elite running back in Jonah Coleman. The quarterback run game was huge for them. And then their defense under Steve Belichick, what was it? 9 TFLs, 6 sacks. I get it. UCLA's on their 4th left tackle of the season. But overall for UW, undefeated at home, bowl eligible. That to me is as good as this season could have gotten if you're being realistic when the season began.
Yeah, I think one of the things when I started to think about this team and seeing them and then watching them play throughout the year, that this is a tough football team and they understand exactly who they are. Now, are there plays that they left out there? Absolutely. You want to play better? Absolutely. But I think at its core, what Jedd Fisch has built to this point is sustainable. So you can continue to expand this, and they will continue to get the recruits that he needs to. But when you look at it, this is just a tough football team that knows how to win. There are going to be some mistakes, plays and calls that you may want to have back. But at its core, when you think about the solid, this team is on solid footing to continue to get better as the seasons go on.
Washington has this weekend off. Of course, they finish up against Oregon on the road, final Saturday of the regular season. UCLA will have to win each of its last 2 games to become bowl eligible in year 1 under Deshaun Foster, USC, and then they finish up non-conference against Fresno State final weekend of the season. Give credit to Greg Schiano and the Scarlet Knights. They start 4-0, and then they become as banged up as any team in the country. They lose Kyle Monungai for a bit. You had already lost Mo Toure at the beginning of the year. Sam Brown, the backup running back, is gone. They find a way to answer the bell. They beat Minnesota. They come back. They beat Maryland. Yogi, Rutgers has gotten to 6 wins. And I know at the beginning of the year, there are a lot of folks who thought that this was maybe the Cinderella story because they were out of the East and the schedule set up. You don't control injuries. You control what you can control, in Greg Schiano's own words. And now they are headed back to the postseason.
Right here, baby. It's a chop. You just keep chopping.
Keep
right?
chopping.
That's what they do. Yeah. You just keep chopping. And I love it when coaches have their way and have their phrase. And I've been following Rutgers. I remember playing against them in the old Big East. They've had their way for a long time when he's been the head coach and, of course, the 2 different stints. And the players reflect it. To your point, everybody's giving them their flowers, right? We were all there at media days, and here comes the Darlings. They start the party off with tremendous success, and then they lose 4. And this team easily could have said, nah, I don't want to chop anymore. I can just shut it down. From our lens, from his lens, no way. They were just continually going to compete. You look at the Minnesota game and then the game, of course, they played this weekend. And the story to me is the quarterback, Ethan Kaliak-Manis, because his discernment is what Howard and we saw that in the rain in training camp. You remember that back in August. We saw it on display the last 2 weeks where there's multiple touchdowns against Minnesota in the first half. In the game this past Saturday, I was really impressed with him. And I think you look at him and he's game manager, operate the offense. He looked like a difference maker. You look at Dymere Miller, this receiving core, they were the more explosive offense. They were the more accurate and efficient offense on Saturday night in the throw game. Didn't know that would be the case coming into the game against Maryland and Billy Edwards and company. So big props to this staff for keeping this thing together. And I think the last thing I'll say, every game, you look at the graphic, it's like 8, 9, 10 players out for the game. I mean, they just continue to find a way to move forward. So congratulations. It is hard in this league to get to 6 wins. They got there, and we'll see. I doubt they're done.
Yeah, one of the things that's significant when you talk about this team and you think about the injuries that they've had is that allows younger players to play. They may not be ready 2 games into it, but all of a sudden they start to build the confidence. They're in their rooms, whether it's the offensive line or defensive back. Their teammates are seeing them being able to execute the plays that are being called. They're getting better. This is what ultimately needs to happen. And I've talked about this for Rutgers. They are outstanding when you talk about their front level guys, but it's about being able to continue to build that depth through recruiting. But it also happens, unfortunately, when you have injuries and you have to play players that may not necessarily be ready, but the mindset, they're ready that way. So it's just about getting that game experience that they're really going to be able to lean on. And that was a huge win. Because, again, like Washington, a very tough physical football team.
Yeah, home against Illinois, at Michigan State are the final 2 for Rutgers to finish the year. As for Maryland, this has been a disappointing season. Yeah. Can you finish strong, especially with Penn State on the schedule to finish the year? I think Mike Locksley's going to look back on 2024 and wish that his team and his staff had been able to do a lot more in their first year, no longer part of the East Division. It is time for us to take you around the Big Ten, and we start on the hardwood. Both Purdue and Wisconsin with massive non-win over the weekend. Boilers knocked off number 2 Alabama inside Mackey as Trey Kaufman-Renn scored a career-high 26. Badgers, meanwhile, took care of business against 9th-ranked Arizona. John Tonje says, keep your 26. I'm going to go for 41. That total was 2 points shy of Frank Kaminsky's single-game program record. And wouldn't you know it, Frank the Tank was in the building as the Badgers honored Bo Ryan. Big Ten soccer, Ohio State continues its amazing season on the men's side as the Buckeyes claim 2024 Big Ten tournament title. And with it, the auto bid to the NCAA's. OSU ranked at or near the top of the national rankings all year, made it even more sweet in the title game with a 1-0 win over arch rival Michigan. Got to keep your head on a swivel if you want to keep up with the Big Ten of the women's NCAA soccer tournament. 10 teams made the NCAAs, and 9 of 10 advanced into this week's second round. USC, Wisconsin, Michigan State, Iowa, Ohio State, UCLA, Minnesota, Penn State, and Washington. Howard, got that all?
Got it all.
All still alive inside the tournament bracket. And our congratulations to head coach Tracy Fuchs and the Northwestern field hockey team. Cats have earned a berth to this year's Final Four. Northwestern opened the NCAA tournament as the number 2 overall seed, scored 9 goals in its first game of the tourney against Miami before then knocking off Virginia. NU will now face UMass in the national semifinals this coming Friday. And it is time for the, what does Dave Revson like to say, eagerly anticipated helmet sticker awards. Yogi Roth leading us off.
All right, I'm going to go with a freshman. Freshmen, they always eagerly anticipate themselves playing, but it's not a linear path. You got to hang, you got to wait. Damon Williams, you get the first sticker, man. 7 of 8, but more importantly, led 3 second-half scoring drives. A lot of times freshmen hit a wall at this point in November. He's continually thriving. That's number 1. Number 2, stay at the quarterback position. Jaden Mayava, first quarterback of Polynesian descent to ever start at USC. It is a big deal. He started 2 of 7, threw a pick, completed his next 9 balls, finished up 23 of his next 29. Congratulations, man, to Jaden Mayava. Keep it going, man. Got a huge one this weekend. And then finally, how about the Oregon Ducks defense? Mateo Uiagalelei and company. Tosh Lupoi has these edge rushers playing at a really high level. Wisconsin goes 1 of 12 on 3rd down. Huge part of that is the impact of Uiagalelei.
Since you wanted to start with defense, I think I'll start with defense as well. Sonny Styles at Ohio State, to me, he is a Swiss Army knife, and he's a guy that's going to come down and play the linebacker position from safety. I predict this guy is continuing to get better, but as they get into the playoffs, I think his ability to cover slot receivers, to cover tight ends are really going to help this defense. He's been outstanding. Saquon Loyal, right? 13 tackles. pretty good, 13 and 3 tackles for loss. Really like what he's able to do. You talk about defensive backs being able to get down into the box and be physical at the point of attack. He's been able to do that. And let's go offensively. We've talked about Woody Marks and what he's been able to do running the football, coming up with big plays in the run game form. But I just really love what he's able to add with the passing game. 6 catches out of the backfield, does a tremendous job and really helps this offense move.
I got some information on what Texas Rio Grande Valley's mascot is. Either one of you guys want to take a shot at it? Yogi?
No clue.
I've been informed by our producer, Bill Copas, they are the Vaqueros, herdsmen or cowboys, Mexican-originated cowboys.
Okay.
So now you know. If you don't know, now you know. For Yogi Roth and Howard Griffith, I'm Rick Pizzo, dropping knowledge on a Monday edition of Big Ten Today.